Well, welcome and thank you for joining our webinar today entitled How to Take Zero Trust from Buzzword to Reality, put in conjunction with Microsoft and Agile, which is a Wipro company. We have three speakers today on our webinar: Tarun Vizariani, who's a partner with Agile, Kevin Karkata, Director of Information Security at Agile, and Matt Sussman, Senior Product Manager with Microsoft. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us this morning.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this webinar. Uh, uh, as we discussed, the topic for today is going to be how, from a zero trust perspective, how do we move from buzzword to reality, right? I mean, as an example, I was there at RSA conference last week, and one of the key themes that I would say a lot of the different vendors were talking about was zero trust. And as we all know, we want to see, zero trust as a concept, and the main aim is to see how everything comes together. So we're going to have a fireside chat where I'll be moderating a lot of the session, and Matt Soseman, who's the Microsoft product manager, is going to be teaming up with me to answer a lot of those questions from the Microsoft team side. Along with me, I have Kevin Karkeda, who's really implemented a lot of this from the Agile team perspective on how to really tactically implement zero trust aspect. And a key part of that is everybody is very different in their journey. So we'll be going more into those details shortly. But Matt, I would love your perspective, right? I mean, Microsoft talks a lot about zero trust. Uh, from your perspective, can you describe what is zero trust? A key part where I was spending a time with two or three CISOs last week, and they said a very common question that's asked even them from the teams are, can I actually purchase zero trust?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I like to take a step back when I think about zero trust, because it can be a buzzword. We hear it just from every security vendor out there. You go walk the RSA conference on the expo floor, everybody's talking about zero trust. You almost want to take a step back and think about kind of the history here of IT security. It wasn't too long ago when we didn't have the concept of remote work. We didn't have the concept of using, meeting tools like we're in right now. It wasn't too long ago where we literally went to an office every day, had to, physically gain access to the office. You used a desktop computer at the office. You logged on to your corporate data and apps in the office, and all of that was being accessed in a data center somewhere that was well protected. So for years, we've had this security blanket around all of our assets. If I actually have to go into an office to access it, I actually have to go into the, to the data center to access that data. And then you fast forward, I mean, it's 2022, times have changed, right? We now have people working from home, working remotely all over the world. We have people that are using not only their corporate issued laptop, but they may be using a MacBook or an iPad that's personal. They may be using SaaS-based applications to get work done and not just whatever standard apps that the company issues them. I mean, so there's all these new scenarios. So you have to kind of think about that evolving history here of just security. And so when you think about zero trust, it's about modernizing your environment to be able to accommodate that. So if I want people to be able to work anywhere, and I want them to be able to collaborate with business partners and customers seamlessly, and I want them to be able to work on data from any device, anywhere, at any time, that requires a change in security and how you approach security. And so for me, that's how I would classify zero trust. So when you think about it from that angle, you're not really purchasing a solution called zero trust. You're applying principles to how you actually approach zero trust within your organization. And so when you think about those principles, it's things like least privilege access, right? So rather than allowing somebody to have full administrative rights in an application or even on their workstation or laptop, they use standard user rights. So that way, if something happens and we have a breach of some sort, that attacker is minimized, right? But it's also around things like verify explicitly. So if I think about every single user that logs in to a resource, whether it's an iPad or a Mac or a Windows machine or it's Dropbox, whatever it may be, I want to verify that it's really them. It's really Matt Soseman coming in. And we can talk more about that later, but I want to verify each and every transaction. And then that third area is around assumed breach. And that there's a lot around assumed breach, but it's really around taking a step back and saying, you know what, there's an attacker in our network right now. So because of that, what do we need to do, right? The bank is being robbed. The robbers are in the bank. How do we make sure that we flush the robbers out? And how do we minimize how much they can steal? And so that's a very big topic to unpack, but it's things around like segmenting networks, and it's around making sure there are monitoring tools. So again, like when I think about zero trust, it's not really a solution I would go out and purchase, but it's more around how do I use all of my security tools that I have? How do I use them in a way that helps me modernize the environment so I can drive these business outcomes like enable remote work or enable collaboration with non-employees and that kind of thing. So that's how I think about it. Sorry, it's a bit of a tangent, but that's kind of how I think about zero trust and you know, how I would approach it.
Yeah, and just to add to what Matt said, right? So when you adopt zero trust, you're actually trying to look into the different signals in your organization, right? You're trying to move towards a modernized approach, just as Matt said, and it forces your entire organization's infrastructure to kind of be verified once again, right? Are you actually following all the recent security principles that have been laid out by NIST, right? Are you in conformance with the different security parameters of within your network and all that stuff? So it's actually it actually forces your organization to kind of go back and take a look if whatever we were doing for so many years, are we doing it right as of today? Because today things have changed, right? Today the security umbrella is different, right? Today the attackers think differently. So I think this is what zero trust is. So it's not something that can be purchased. It is a collaboration of different principles, tools. It's a collaboration of different frameworks that have to come together, have to be customized for organization, right?
Yeah, Kevin, maybe just to quickly add, and then we can go on to the next question here. But it also, I would encourage people to look at it from an organizational perspective. So you want to look at all the technical stuff that we just talked about, but look at it from an organizational perspective, a cultural perspective.
Yeah.
You know, the organization, the company, or the business, you're going to have to think about how do I evolve my IT and security culture, and even just my employee culture around how data and resources are used and accessed. And what I mean by that is some of this requires you to, I mean, we've all been in the industry for a long time, right? And so we've all grown up with, you know, being able to use specific type of tools and being able to do things a specific way, but times have changed, right? Attackers have gotten smarter. There's new types of threats out there almost every day. And so the culture has to shift and adapt to that. And so that means not only do you have to make changes with your technology, but you need to make changes with your people and with your organization and with how, and with just basically how the business is ran, right? To make sure you accommodate all of that.
Yeah.
Great question.
Thank you for your perspective, Matt and Kevin. Moving on to the next question, and I think this is one of the main reasons for doing this webinar, because these are some of the main questions we as a collective team between the Microsoft and Agile team, we get asked about this all the time, right? You know, Microsoft has published some great material, right? Microsoft is all in with the zero trust principles, the zero trust architecture. A lot of the material has been published. Taking that a little bit further, right? I mean, we know when we work with different clients, right? All of them are in a very different state. Some of the key questions which we've gathered over the last few years, well, zero trust is pretty new, but at least from that perspective, some key questions that they've been asking us. The first part is about, tell me if what is Microsoft's vision in terms of addressing both the on-premise and the cloud environment, and how do we address that problem when we know clients are in that hybrid state? So that's part one of this. So Matt and Kevin, any thoughts you have on that one?
Yes, I'll jump in, and Kevin, feel free to jump in any time. So So Microsoft has a myriad of security tools and services that they offer. But when you think about on-prem and cloud and just a hybrid model, there's a few things that come to mind. But let's come back to that. Let's just take a step back. So with the way Microsoft approaches Zero Trust is those three principles I talked about previously: verify explicitly, use least privilege access, and assume breach. So that's how we think about that at Microsoft. That's how we approach it. Now, if you unpack that, what does that mean if I'm running Windows Server Active Directory on premises? Well, that means making sure that I have permission set up appropriately, making sure that I'm using things like multi-factor authentication for users to sign into apps, which might mean I have to adopt a cloud-based identity provider like Azure AD in a hybrid model to be able to enable those modern types of services. It also means that I need to look at how do I protect and secure those devices, right? Identity is obviously very important, but right after that is those devices. So how am I securing those devices? Whether they're on-prem or not doesn't really matter, but what type of endpoint detection response solution am I using, and antivirus and security policy and all those things. But more importantly, let's take it away from like the client, the end user. Let's look at the back end. Let's look at the actual servers and the line of business apps that are being accessed. That's where we want to think about if those are running on premises or in the cloud, it doesn't really matter. That's where we could apply tools like Microsoft Defender for Cloud. And that tool can actually protect those servers and those apps regardless of where they live. They could live on premises, they could live in Azure, they could live in AWS or GCP. And so being able to apply those security tools to it, it's very powerful. But you want to take a step back though and look at, well, what's my process around this, right? And what kind of policy do I need to create that governs all of this? The easy part is deploying the tools, right? The hard part is figuring out how do I make this work in my environment, and how do I approach that? And then kind of the last thing here, you have this last bullet point around multiple security solutions. So Microsoft, obviously, we've got security tools that span Azure and Microsoft 365, but our tools are also flexible enough that they can also protect workloads that are in non-Microsoft data centers like GCP, AWS, even on-prem. But if I'm using third-party security tools, a third-party identity provider, a third-party endpoint detection response provider, a third-party DLP, data loss prevention provider, Microsoft can actually interoperate with that. Yeah. And so there's a website called the Microsoft Intelligent Security Association, or MISA, where you could actually go out and see which security vendors that you probably own can actually interoperate and integrate with your existing Microsoft tools. And that's where it gets really interesting. And so it's not about buying everything under one umbrella over the other. It's about having the architecture that works for you, that meets your requirements, but then making sure that you understand the end-to-end. And so making sure there's no gaps in visibility. And that's where you have to make sure these tools work together. And obviously Microsoft can have some capability there. But Kevin, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this.
Sure, and I think you kind of touched on all the points really well, right? Like whether you're on-prem or cloud, it doesn't really matter, right? And just to give you an example with one of my clients, so they have McAfee DLP, right? So McAfee DLP does the detection for all the data that goes through certain applications, right? But the action is taken by Azure AIP. AIP, right? Or Microsoft Information Protection. So as Matt very well said, you can, it's not that you have to use Azure Information Protection or Microsoft Information Protection to kind of, look into your data in your system. No, you can use a combination of tools that you have, right? And if your existing tool or if your existing product does not kind of give you a coverage for all the use cases, you can kind of build it into the Azure platform, right? For example, there was another example with one of our clients wherein they had certain use cases where McAfee was not detecting certain kind of data that would pass through certain kind of documents, right? So how did we tackle it? We actually configured certain policies under the NCAS umbrella, right? And that's where we did the detection, right? So, and the reason this was happening is because their applications are on-prem. right? And it could not completely integrate with Azure. And also it could not completely integrate with McAfee. But the way we made it work is we use a combination of tools and make it work. And it's also not so much that, okay, if your application is on-prem, if your application is legacy and you cannot adopt zero trust, right? There are different authentication protocols that can be kind of, adapted by a system. And going back to the previous question, and very well Max said, it's a cultural change, right? It's about your organization kind of adapting to this new modern technique, this new modern culture, and the way that applications respond to your authentication, your authorization, and whether your organization is kind of working towards that new principles, right? I'll give you another example wherein I was working with this organization, and they had people who would never change passwords for about 6 months, right? And everything was working fine. It was a very perimeter-driven kind of security framework that they had. And when we went there and we were trying to kind of deploy Azure AD, right, with password hash sync, now the challenges came with, okay, you have to change your passwords, right? But the people were not ready because their experience was bad, right? Because they had to remember so many different passwords, so they would never change their passwords, right? So it's about adopting the right tools and also empowering your users, whether they can be, they can adapt to this new zero trust kind of framework that your company is building towards. And again, zero trust framework is not going to be built over a span of like few months or 1 year. Every organization is different, and it could take time for different organizations to kind of build a framework, right? So it doesn't really matter whether it's on premise or whether it's on, it's up on the cloud. It's about how you have defined your security framework and what tools you have right now and what tools you can use from Azure to kind of, build this whole umbrella of zero trust framework. So with that being said, we have a poll question up on your screen, and we would like to know if your company is kind of aiming to be passwordless, right? Whether your company kind of is right now, where do they stand? So we will be discussing more about passwordless. I'll also be sharing a kind of a use case on one of our clients on how they achieve passwordless.
Yeah, while we're waiting on people to respond, I'll just kind of share a short story with everybody. This was a few years ago, but I was working the booth at the RSA conference and had a gentleman walk up to me, and I was working the Azure Information Protection section of the booth. So we talked about AIP a little bit before, and this gentleman walked up to me and he's like, "What is this product? I don't know anything about it." So we kind of went through it, and he had this attitude of like, well, I don't use Azure, so I can't use this. And so we had to kind of really unpack it. But what the moral of the story though was we started getting into his business requirements. Not that he needed a DLP solution or he needed to protect data. It was more around like why. And so as we started getting further and further into it, he had contractors he had to work with, and those contractors were using like Dropbox and Citrix ShareFile and whatever else. And so then we started going through and doing some demos with how Azure Information Protection protects that data anywhere it goes. And then we started getting into these 3 principles and how they would apply. To make a long story short, what really helped him understand here was those business objectives he was trying to drive. He's like, yeah, but I need a DLP solution. Well, hold on a second. Why do you need a DLP solution? And we had to kind of dig into it. So, kind of what I'm sharing here is we want to make sure as IT professionals and security professionals, we want to make sure we're doing the right thing for the business, right? So when we see something like use least privilege access, that sounds great to me as a technical guy. Yeah, let's do all of that. But why do we want to do it? And how does that actually help the business? How does that help the organization? And you almost got to map it to those business priorities and those outcomes and those objectives. And so, just as the audience starts to kind of think through this and what we're saying, again, it's not just from the technical side. You have to look at it from the business side as well. You can do all the technical stuff in the world, but if it's not actually going to help your end users be more productive or raise a stock price or attract new customers or whatever it may be, then it's not going to have the impact and the splash that you want it to have. So just some food for thought. Anyway, I digress.
Well, it's good to see that most of the folks are adopting, passwordless. So I'm happy based on the polls.
Yeah, great discussions, Matt and Kevin. I think this is a perfect segue into the next part of the question, which is, what have you both seen as really a vision to mature a client zero trust posture? Can you give some specific examples on what should clients be doing, and what is the end goal? What is the vision that they should be thinking about?
Yeah, let me take a stab at that, and then Kevin, again, feel free to jump in. So
Sure.
I've seen a lot of this over the years, and every environment is different. So that's kind of the first thing to remember. But a short story here I'll share with you on this. So I had a customer of mine. This was a few years ago. They brought in a consultancy agency to look at this from the business perspective. Right? They were actually thinking about embracing more remote work. This was before the pandemic. And they were thinking about how do we allow more collaboration with business partners without allowing them access to our network, all of these different scenarios. And so they started bringing in a consultancy firm to help them think through that. And what happened was they built out this roadmap, and it was a multi-year roadmap, but they built out this roadmap of step by step, what do we need to do so we can reach these goals that we have from a business perspective? And in each milestone, they layered in technology, and they layered in how do we need to adopt that technology with the end users. So as you might imagine, the first step on that vision to mature that posture and on that roadmap was identity. And within identity, it was making sure that multi-factor authentication was enabled. But that's more than just a checkbox, right? I could check the box, that's the easiest part, but I actually have to get you to use it. And that requires adoption and change management, that requires training. And so you had all of these different milestones and pieces in this roadmap, and it was a couple hundred, right? And this was like multiple slides. But that was how this customer started laying out kind of their vision or roadmap for how they're going to get to zero trust. Now, fast forward, I just talked to these guys about a year ago. They never got to zero trust. Why? Because zero trust, there is no end state, right? I can't give you the formula and say, you're going to get to zero trust in a year, because threats change, the business changes, technology changes. So it's a journey that's continuous, but it's evergreen, right? You're always improving. You're always doing things to improve that posture by adopting zero trust. But you're never going to get there because it's an endless road, right? But for me, that vision to mature is what you have on this slide right here, starting with identity, right? And now I talked about multi-factor authentication, but it's other things too, least privilege access. It's also about making sure how we're monitoring your identity. So if I get email phished, which is bound to happen, no matter what kind of security tools you have in the environment, how do I make sure those credentials are unusable? All of those things start with identity. And it's kind of good to go through the basics, right? Endpoints. Are my endpoints patched? Do I have a patching plan? It's shockingly surprising how many organizations out there don't have a patching plan. And that's just the basics, right? If you go out and read the Verizon breach report, the IBM breach report, all these different breach reports, usually the root causes of these breaches is nothing sexy. It's the basics. Hey, we failed to patch. Hey, we failed to do identity hygiene. We failed to do basic network segmentation, right? And there's no product you can buy that will magically solve that. Those are organizational things. So what I'm trying to say here is that that vision to mature that is kind of getting your ducks in a row and figuring out where does it make sense to start. Obviously, identity for me makes sense, but there might be another place. It might be, hey, we don't have a way to do MFA because we use Active Directory on premises. Do we need to go buy a solution that would allow us to do MFA? What does that look like? So you want to lay out this roadmap and start to piece it together, but you may need help. And that's going to require some organizational change, and it's going to require maybe even some outside help. But as you go through that, I'll pause here in just a moment, but as you go through that, you'll start to progress through this maturity model of, okay, I've got MFA, I've got my identities taken care of, endpoint, I've got a patching plan, Well, now I have to think about how do I respond to threats and endpoints? How do I automatically isolate them? And obviously there's technology for that, but writing the process for that. But the biggest one is what you see down at the bottom of that slide. You could do all this stuff in the world. You can go out and buy all the products and the solutions and have all the sexy technology, but if nobody's behind the wheel monitoring it,
right,
it's going to fail. So you got to have visibility. That doesn't mean monitoring all of the alerts coming in, because you get alert fatigue. That doesn't work. So it's making sure you have the right alerts coming in, but you also have automation. That might be automation that you write. That might be automation that comes with the product that the vendor does. That may be automation that you bring in somebody like Agile to write for you. But you got to automate those alerts because it's impossible for a human or multiple humans to sit there and monitor each one. And then you need to have analytics and be able to spot trends, but be able to have some key performance indicators that you monitor over time. So you can see, okay, here's the threats that we blocked this week, and let's go back and review that. What did we do right? What did we do wrong? Where are the tools working? Where are they not working? How can we improve our processes? See what I mean? It's organizational. The technology is only going to get you so far. So that's kind of my angle on it. But Kevin, would love to hear what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah. So with my experience, right? The first thing if anyone would ask me is to kind of, you got it right, bang on, it's identities. And what I do is I first look at their directories, right? If a client will ask me like, how can I improve my security posture, so that I can attain zero trust going down? First, I look into their identities. I look into what their IAM solution is, right? Where they store their identities. There are some clients wherein they have multiple directories, but for the end user or for the end business, the vision is just one directory. But behind the scenes, they have stored some identities in LDAP. Some are, some identities are stored in an application database, and some are stored in an Active Directory or some other directory, right? And because of this, there is no monitoring in place. There's no single identity to monitor, and now it's become a maintenance nightmare, right? So what should they do? I think the first place is they should kind of look at their directories. They should look at their data store and figure out how can they improve the security around that identity, right? And how can they lock and make that identity kind of secure, right? That's one place. And in the second place, what I look at is, you covered it, devices, endpoints, right? Can you beef up the security around your endpoints, around your devices? Now, many of the clients, they have tools, they have some tools work, some tools they just don't scale enough, for the endpoints. So in that case, what I tell them is, if you cannot protect the identity, or you cannot protect the device in the wholesome, right? Protect the data, right? Because the data is where the hackers are running for, right? So, and try to protect your data as well, right? And so that you are at least moving one step closer towards zero trust. And it's not just these few components that you have to work on, but it's like there are so many other different, it's your infrastructure, it's your network security, right? And for many organizations, when I go, they have the tools in place, right? The tools have been procured, but they have not been fully implemented. And that is because your existing team or your existing IT does not have enough help, right? They may need help from an outside source, or they may just not have the knowledge. For example, like I've come across so many organizations, I would say at least 70% of our clients that I've talked with, they have a PAM solution that they have procured, but they don't use it. It's not implemented fully, right? They have not defined password vaulting system, right? They think they've implemented it. They go and store the identities there, and they use the password from the tool, but it's not architected so much so that it's foolproof, right? And that's because they need help on kind of understanding what a modern security structure framework should be. So I would say just reach out and kind of get help, right? You for sure might be having tools, and with your existing tools within your network, you can achieve zero trust, right? It is, again, it's a journey. It's not going to happen, overnight or within a few months, but you do have the tools within your network wherein you can start improvising and building your blocks to achieve zero trust.
Just a moment, because I think this is a really important part, and just kind of thinking about all the attendees on this webinar here. There's two things I would like for you to maybe walk away with this question. Everything that Kevin just said, and then think about the name of the game is not to restrict everything, right? Oftentimes as IT pros or as security pros, we want to lock down everything, right? I mean, like if it was up to me, I'd put standard user on everybody and restrict all your permissions, right? But you wouldn't be able to do your job, let alone HR wouldn't be able to recruit anybody to come work at your company anymore. Who wants to work at a company like that, right? So when you think about this, it's the name of the game is enabling your users to be productive, and let security be behind the scenes. They don't need to know about it.
Yeah.
And so if you think about the productivity tools that are out there, Microsoft 365 as an example, a lot of the security is behind the scenes. We talked about Azure Information Protection before. Now it's rebranded to Microsoft Information Protection, but that's built into Microsoft Office. You don't know it's there.
You have it.
Right?
Yeah, you have it.
But what if you don't use Office 365, Microsoft 365? What if you use Google Workspace? Well, again, these security tools, they can actually plug in to those third-party productivity tools. But the name of the game is, how can I make users productive without making security that burden? So remember that. The second thing here is, what can I do right now? Because there's a lot to it, right? I mentioned that roadmap customer example. They had multi-year. But what can you do right now? Take a self-assessment and think about, what's your crown jewels? What is the most important things in your environment that if you got breached, when you get breached, what are the most important things in that environment that could be stolen or deleted or what have you, right? And then reverse engineer that, work backwards from there. Okay, so I identified that I've got this intellectual property. That's really what makes my company a company. And if that got out there in the open market, I'd go out of business. Okay, how do I put layers and layers around the intellectual property, right? How do I encrypt the data? Then how do I restrict network access? And then how do I do all these different things? So you almost want to just kind of take a self-assessment, figure out what's the most important thing in the environment and work yourself backwards. A lot of the folks on this call are in IT. You are actually the most important thing.
Yeah.
Because if your account gets breached, you've got access to everything. It's game over. So what can you do right now? I would actually think about the most important things in the environment and think about your access and your endpoint that you use and all of the things that you do in your day job. How can you better protect that? And then once you've got your IT, admins taken care of, then start moving into some of these other things, right? MFA for IT admins, making sure that those devices have EDR technology and automation and remediation and all of those different things, right? Do we need to use a secondary machine for this, a privilege access workstation, access domain controllers?
Right.
All of those different things come into account. So just kind of look at what can you do to strengthen IT admin access, and then go to, okay, where's our intellectual property? Now, how do we put those security layers around it? So that's how I would think about over the next 3 months. And as you do that, as you start to protect yourself, you're going to see, wow, there's all these other opportunities available. One more point before I forget. You have a lot of security tools in your environment. When you think about the average company out there has 40 security tools based on research. I can't know everything about all 40, neither can you, right? And so that's impossible. But embrace that, learn and grow. So, okay, I have this third-party security tool that does X, Y, Z. What can I go learn about it to see, can that help me achieve what I'm trying to do here, right? So almost look within before you go shop around, because there's chances that what you already own, whether it's Microsoft or something else, could help you along that maturity. So just some things I'm starting to think about as Kevin, as you talked through it, this kind of inspired me.
Yeah, and I cannot stress enough self-assessment. I think first go and do self-assessment and see where you guys are in this security journey, right? How mature you guys are and what tools you have. And that's when you kind of can plan on how do you want to achieve a zero trust. And you may need to get help from outside. But even if, like, for example, even if you approach us, right, and if you say, hey, I want to approach, I want to like go on this zero trust journey. The first thing what we would do is we would like to understand like what do you already have, right? And what are your authentication protocols, right? What are your authorization protocols, right? What is your network security? What are the security rules you use? So we'll have to do a self-assessment, and in some cases, you may need help even to do the self-assessment, which we can help you guys with that, right? So yeah, interesting stuff. I mean, we can go on and on this topic.
Yeah.
Right.
Just another piece that I hear all the time as well, Matt and Kevin, which is kind of related to this, which is especially in the last 2 years, as everybody's gone remote, right? With what's happening around the world. What is the impact of that from a zero trust perspective? Because just the whole remote worker and remote worker enablement, any thoughts on that?
I have a story I'll save for the next question on that. So you'll remind me on that. But if you think about what's happened in the last 2 years, going on 3 years now, I think the world has learned a lot from an IT perspective, right? Remote work was a thing, but now it's really a thing. And collaboration between different companies and different organizations, it's even more real than ever before. But for me, as an IT person, I've learned a lot about how the importance of security and compliance is. Because not only are you looking at, protecting your environment from threats, you're also looking at protecting your environment from those employees that are looking to leave. We just had the Great Resignation. It's probably still going on, where people are leaving organizations and going to find other jobs. Mm-hmm. Well, the last 2 years they've been remote. They may be copying intellectual property from your company over to their personal machine, upload it to their personal Dropbox, right? They're going to take that stuff with them. If they're a seller, they're going to take their customer contacts with them. So how do we enforce that compliance, right? And how do we think about not just those threats from nation state actors and whatnot, but how do we look at that insider threat? And when employees are maybe on purpose oversharing or maybe accidentally oversharing. So Kevin, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, but that's kind of how I think about it and what we've learned.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I mean, I have like a client example that I'm going to share pretty soon, but what I've seen is like many customers kind of, they're a little reluctant to get a change in the organization, right? And they're scared that if they do this change, okay, there's a huge cost involved, and there's a cultural change, and people won't adapt to this, and I'm going to lose my people. But nevertheless, if they don't do that, they are vulnerable and susceptible to so many breaches and attacks in their organization. And like, I've had clients wherein people actually left the organization and they took the whole intellectual property and they went out to another organization. And now the other organization is using that to kind of boost their sales and their revenues and their numbers, right? And when we told the first organization, hey, you guys should, adopt certain security protocols to kind of, lock down your devices, lock down your data on certain content, on certain sites, they were like, no, there's a huge cost involved, and our people are used to doing things a certain way, and we don't want to like change this. But now when this guy, he's a top management guy who actually moved from this organization to another organization, they kind of lost so much revenue. So sometimes like you'll have to like weigh in like whether it makes sense to do this investment in kind of beefing your security kind of posture versus just losing this information to someone else, and then you're at a loss anyways, and now this loss is huge because now you have to fill in a void gap of your sales numbers. So companies have to adopt this pretty soon, and they have to move fast because technology is changing, security posture is changing, the way people think is changing. And they have to like kind of like stay on top. And since we have the slide on the screen, I would like to just highlight how we, Agile, as a security consulting company, can help you guys, right? Now, we do have a zero trust strategy that we kind of help most of our clients with, right? And that's where we actually start. It's an easy play. It kind of brings everyone on the table. We talk to people right from the CIO, the CISO, all the way to your security architects and your application developers, right? And that's why we have different packages: basic, intermediate, advanced, right? Depending on how your organization is, where you guys stand. Many organizations have already started adopting zero trust. I see in the poll, which is good. So based on that, we have different packages, and we'll come in and we'll help you guys kind of build this roadmap, right? And we'll also tell you what your quick wins are. You know, it's not only that we come in to give you a piece of paper or a presentation saying that, okay, this is a zero trust roadmap, go and do it. No, we'll actually sit with you and we'll tell you where your loopholes are and what are your quick wins, what tools you have already, and what tools you can enable, right? To kind of do immediate, kind of deploy immediate security briefings on your network. For example, many customers have MIP or AIP, but they are reluctant. Oh, but I have SharePoint on-prem. You know, although I have the licenses for MIP, but I have SharePoint on-prem. Guess what? Microsoft has on-prem scanners, right? Which can actually scan your content and tag your content based on the labels that are defined in MIP, right? And I'm actually doing that implementation right now for one of our clients. And they did not know this, right? Because they did not take help. But when you came in and did a security strategy for them, that's when they realized that, oh, we have 5 SharePoint farms, and we thought we just can secure our data. But guess what? Now they are doing it with us, right? Likewise, we have quick starts for passwordless analysis. We do B2C POCs, a quick B2C POCs, wherein we show you what your external vendors are, your business partners are, and how can they be on a separate directory, and the whole user journey and the user experience over there. We help you with application modernization strategies, wherein we build the authentication authorization protocols for you. We'll sit with you guys, we'll understand how your application is, what are your legacy applications, what kind of authentications you guys are currently using, and we can even assess and tell you okay, your applications, 50% of your applications are legacy and they can use SAML, or the other 50% can actually start using OIDC method, right? So we'll do all those analysis for you guys, right? So likewise, these are our kind of different quick starts, and you can totally reach out to us after this webinar and we can help you guys with that, right? After you, Tarun, if I don't want to steal the show. There's always more to talk and we can always have another one.
Yeah, it clearly seems you both are very passionate about this topic here. I think, I know we covered the strategic aspect of the vision, we covered the tactical part,
yeah.
But it'd be good if you kind of talk a little bit about, some real life examples, right, on how clients went about their zero trust journey. And obviously we understand every client is going to be in a different state, but just keeping that in mind.
Correct.
Just examples of how, a few clients went about their journey.
Let me take that, and maybe Matt, then you can follow up after me, or you can cover after me. So I have a real life scenario, and yeah. So we have this large manufacturing kind of, they're like a design and manufacturing firm. And when we approached them, we were already doing some IAM solution work for them. We were deploying some IAM products. And at that time, we realized that they have a very conglomerated kind of network, right? Their security is.
Tarun, do you want to jump in?
Don't think we can hear you, Kevin, but I can take this up. So I think this example is a very large manufacturing client, right? And they were using perimeter-oriented cybersecurity, typical things we see at the client, where they using a lot of on-premise VPN to get onto their Azure landscape. They're using Semantic Web Product. They're using all these different products, such as the pings of the world for ping LDAP, the AD, and the Azure AD. They have 3 different directories. Large client having multiple different products, as Matt covered that previously, right? There are 40 products that you see in the environment. And they have a lot of passwords stored in LDAP and password stores in AD. They're using even ping fed as an example here to do some of the apps and custom builds from an open source perspective here. And as we went about this journey, I think there were 3 key things we focused on there. If you go to the previous slide. So a key part of that for the client was all about directory segmentation strategy. That was the number 1 thing which client said, we want to make sure it's not game over based on all the B2E internal employees, B2B, which would be business partners, and B2C, which would be consumers. So they adopted a from a zero trust perspective. For them, it was more about a directory segmentation strategy. So which is really that bullet 2 or in between that box that you see there. The first one that they went about their journey was a lot about how do they improve the user experience. As Matt mentioned, just having a lot of these multiple products. In this case, they wanted to consolidate those, but apply a lot of adaptive authentication, apply a lot of least privilege principles, apply, consolidate from a single password perspective, put on self-service password reset, and also just the overall login experience transformation that was happening along with that. And then the last one, as they went about this, was really try to gain cost efficiencies by reducing the overall technology debt and by better integrating a lot of these things together, right? So and again, they were all in for the cloud. So they have a cloud first strategy. And by doing that, they are, really removing the cost from an infrastructure related cost perspective. And by doing that overall product consolidation, they went with the Microsoft platform in this case to remove other products and have an overall cost takeout here. So.
Right.
Kevin, I think
sorry guys, I had a glitch and I'm back in. Yeah. So I think Tarun covered it well. So what this client did is they understood that how important zero trust is, and they kind of adopted the technology really well. And as Tarun very well said, they moved their focus onto Azure, right? So like for example, they had Semantic VIP, which was a good MFA, but then the first thing they did is bring a change. So they brought the change by adopting Azure MFA, right? That doesn't mean Semantic VIP is not doing the work; it's still doing the work, but they bought an Azure MFA, right? It changed the focus, right? And that's when they started building out things. They implemented password hash sync, right? So now the password among all the directories are synced. So they took these baby steps, but I would say they are almost 50-60% there in achieving their zero trust goal, right? And again, as Matt said earlier, it's a moving target, right? By the time they come there, it's again going to move, right? We defined some principles for them, and these are the principles on the screen. Now, these are the core principles, but again, for this organization, they also had a huge issue with identities, which I mentioned. They had 3 directories. So, they had this number 3 guiding principle wherein they have to have a proper group management system, wherein they only assign permissions or access the least that they can for any application or for an identity, right? So this was a big challenge because everyone had access to everything. I mean, they have workers all throughout, factory workers all throughout the world, right? And people had access to everything. So this was important for them. So we kind of helped them with this journey. They are achieving it. So the first thing that they did was kind of go passwordless. The second major thing is they are doing application modernization, right? It's a big scale in which this is going on. And as Matt and Tarun said, it has to be seamless to the organization. That was the first thing that they wanted us to take care of. It has to be seamless to business users, no impact to the business users, but you still deliver the technology under the table without anyone knowing that they had an impact. And that's what we are doing. It's by building an application modernization framework, by helping the application owners figure out what methods they should do for which application. Some applications are still old, they're still legacy, and they will just be there and they'll die down over a period of time, or they will be replaced with another application. But the best thing is the organization adopted this new modern mentality of using security posture, right? And that's what made this whole journey for us so simple. And it's still going on. We are still there. We're helping them with their application modernization portfolio. We have moved about, I would say, about 100 applications. That was the external facing apps. We've moved those into the Azure umbrella right now. And they still have Ping. Ping is still doing federations for some of the apps. And all the brand new apps, they get directly connected to Azure. They are birthed at Azure, right? They are not birthed on-prem, or they are not birthed into any other directory but Azure. And the reason is because Azure has the information of every user, of every identity, of every device. And basically there are so many signals that only kind of Azure handles, which no other tool on the market I know of can handle at this point, because everything is happening over the internet. And as remote work keeps increasing and growing here and there, like we need a solution that can tell us that, oh, this is my tool, or this is my guy, or this is my application that's having a problem, right? And what is that problem? It's not only about telling the problem, it's also like telling you what that problem is, because there is a breach that has happened somewhere in some other country, and your application is using the same protocol that where this breach has happened. And that only Azure can tell you, because Azure captures so many signals all over the internet. And that's what I like about it, right? I wouldn't want to, just keep talking. I know we are almost at the top of the hour, so I'll hand it over to Tarun. And yeah, I'm more than happy to talk to you guys. If you guys want to connect to me, with me or Matt or with Tarun, please reach out to us. We are more than happy to have a conversation, just offline. Yeah, Tarun, up to you.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, no, we are running up on time here, just about 2 minutes remaining. So I just want to thank everyone for really attending the call today. I think a big principle what we are adopting, and as you see our tagline here, is we are ready to meet you wherever you are on your zero trust journey, right? I think that's the key part of it. For every client, you'll notice everybody is going to be in a different state of journey. We're happy to speak with you separately and get into the details on how you can mature your zero trust program. So yeah, thank you everyone for really attending the webinar. And to learn more about Agile's other webinars, please log into agile.com/webinars to understand all the other webinars that we have in place. Thank you very much, everyone. Really appreciate you joining.